Okay, we can start. I'm glad to see you here, and today we will touch one very important topic that will touch two areas that haven't been connected before: economics and environmental protection. Many companies and people would like to earn more money doing nothing. This is a very normal case and normal strategy. But to be honest, to earn more money doing nothing, it doesn't work. So if we are doing nothing, we earn nothing. But we know about the Pareto principle that 20% of our efforts could bring us 80% of results. And this principle could be acceptable regarding the environmental protection principles and integrating it in the normal being of the oil and gas industry. So we will start today. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Shvelova Nadezhda. I have finished Gubkin State University, Economics, Moscow State University, Environmental Protection and Rational Use. My thesis in Gubkin University was focused on the associated gas management principles and financial assessment. I have been worked in oil and gas company in Russia and abroad in local overseas. Now I'm associated professor in Gubkin University, head of environmental department and small oil and gas company operating a couple license areas. And I'm CEO of my own business, environmental and financial consulting agency. So we can start. We have one task today to understand what is integration of environmental protection principles in oil and gas business. Is that Sisyphean work or just real useful methods and principles, and what equals the new business opportunities? We will talk about I have asked you before if you are environmental specialist or not. So I will bring you up to speed. What is it? Environmental protection in oil and gas industry. Then we'll move to the key players in the oil and gas business regarding the environmental protection. Then we will try to connect the environmental and business goals of the company. Then we will check what is the main principles of environmental management and environmental risk management in oil and gas company. And I will give you some solutions, conclusions, and maybe advices working for business. So we start with the first part. And what is it, environmental law? Environmental law is a process which covers many areas of the impacting of the oil and gas industry. And it's like forest law, forest codes, something regarding air protection, waste management, and others significant areas that should be protected against the subsoil users and oil and gas business and industry. That's briefly oil field life cycle and integration of the environmental principles and main aspects into the oil field management process. So before any operation, we should have 4 important steps. There is environmental impact assessment, state environmental expertise. We need to develop environmental design documentation and get environmental permits. After that, we could start any activity in oil and gas field. After we started, and we are working with contractors, construction and drilling and fracking and so on, we need to make external environmental audit on contractors' activities, and also we need to make monitoring, and all our activities should be based on environmental protection principles, and also environmental reporting, environmental payments, and so on. So a little bit more detailed about some steps. For example, environmental impact assessment is a very important step to make a baseline studies. What is the area we enter? What was here before? It is very important because we could get additional unexpected risk when, for example, in that area, the previous subsoil users have left something what we should remediate during our working process. So environmental impact assessment is baseline studies plus our activities, our project, our perspective of oil and gas development. Then we need to figure out what is the real impact and what is the mitigation measures. Then we need to check what are the alternatives of our activities and take the best decision. In Russia, the system is built such way that this project, environmental impact assessment project, should be submitted to the state authorities, and we should get such a permit. It's state environmental expertise. Not every project in oil and gas industry should have this kind of expertise. There are some exceptions, but the regular process is as it is. So other important stage before starting any activities are the environmental permits. They are touching emissions, wastewater discharges, and waste generation and accumulation. The process of this development of design documentation, environmental design documentation, is inventory of facilities, of emission sources, of waste accumulation sites, and then we need to check what is the maximum emissions or waste volumes, and then we need to describe it very briefly in the project and submit it to the authorities. After that, we get the permits, and according to these permits available for approximately 5 years, we need to operate and manage our activities, and one time per 3 years, authorities could come to our oil fields and oil and gas company and inspect and check the performance and how we operate without violations or not. We need to establish the environmental protection in our oil fields, and one important point of the environmental protection is environmental monitoring. So we are sampling air, water, and soils and snow and everything that could be checked and where our pollutants could arise, and see the dynamics and see if we have over limits or not. So we are checking not only our emissions volumes and discharges and the types of pollutants that we have, but also we check background So that means that we sample air and water and soil in a non-contaminated area. Also, we have two types of environmental payments and environmental fees in environmental protection aspect. So we have the regular payments that every subsoil user and every oil and gas company calculates based on permits and on the production activity, and annually paying for the emissions, for waste accumulation, for discharges. And other type of payments are fines and penalties when we violate the environmental law and when some kind of environmental authorities come with inspection and detect our violations. Oh, sorry. So regular fees are calculated according the limits and could be multiplied when we are exceeding the limits or we are operating without limits. For example, if our technological process has been changed, but we haven't changed the project documentation. And what about fines and penalties? They are based on the administrative code of offenses, and there are some varieties from 10,000 rubles to 1 million. It's like key violations of the subsoil users, and as you see, the most significant is for the non-compliance with the rational use principles. That mean, for example, for the associated gas flaring, and this is very hard for many companies to achieve 95%. So, but legislation is dynamically changed, and since 2018, every company should have a categorization of facilities, have placed on the license area, and that means that we are moving from the equal requirements for every facility, for different facilities. We are moving to different requirements for different facilities. That will touch the inspections, reporting, and every area of industrial activity of oil and gas companies. So what does it mean? Every facility, for example, well or a pipeline or some kind of complex of these facilities should be categorized into 4 categories, where category 1 is the facility with the highest environmental impact. And according to these categories, companies has different requirements and obligations to reporting and to obtain additional permits. So instead of 3 kind of permits that are existing now, we should have to get 1 complex permit, which includes emissions, waste, and wastewater discharges. What does it mean for the companies? Before to touch this question, we will check what are the key players in that area and in this business. There are 4 players. The first is the environmental regulators. So there are federal agencies and ministries and other authorities. So we know that there is a Ministry of Natural Resources and 5 federal agencies. The main function of these authorities are they are creating regulations and inspect how the subsoil users and other companies comply with these regulations and comply their obligations. The second player is subsoil users. They are oil and gas companies having the licensed area. They are operating on their area. They are within the bonds of license area, they pay special taxes, and they should meet the license obligations because the state authorities have a right to suspend or withdraw the license if something goes wrong or some requirements are not fulfilled. The third part, third type of key player are contractors. It's like service companies. There are drilling, design documentation developers, and fracking and waste management, waste treaters, and others. So there are contractors. And there are fourth type of the key players. They're investors. Investors are so-called gray influencers on the subsoils because before to take any decision to invest or not invest, they made an environmental audit on the investment object. So they're interested if any company has fines and penalties, if they provide and submit to authorities any reports, what are the amount of penalties, and etc. So before to take any decision to invest or not invest, they need to be sure that their investments won't cover some fines of subsoil user. Then we can move to the third part and check what is the relationship between the environmental obligations and business opportunities for companies. So we need to make investigation, what is environmental SWOT analysis, and what is the key profit sources of key players, if it's acceptable, and we will check the target analysis, target auditory for each player. What does it mean? For example, for subsoil user, from the financial point of view regarding the environmental activity, is very interesting to reduce the amount of fees, penalties, and regular annual payments. But we see that every subsoil user has constructors, and this is some kind of risky area, because the responsibility of a subsoil user is to take a control over a contractor and take a responsibility for their actions too. And their actions could be also the reason of fees and penalties because of any violations. Here we can see how it works with the governmental authorities and with the society. So there are two influencers on the environment. It's subsoil users and contractors. Then we have the society that has a right for the good environment and good conditions of life being. And then we have the government who can make prosecutors checks and issue some penalties for subsoil users. But we see that government is not able to, when we are talking about the subsoil using process, and because of the full responsibility of providing environmental protection on the oil or gas field is the responsibility of the subsoil user. So the government checks the subsoil user, but not the contractor. And the responsibility of any subsoil user's actions are on contractor. And if we check the business goals of contractor and subsoil users, we see that they are not similar. They are just goes into the conflict, because where is the increase of the amount for their work? This is increase for expenses for subsoil user. How does it affect on the whole business of environmental protection? Here is a matrix of responsibility, threats, like a SWOT analysis, plus business goals and missions of 4 key types of the players of this environmental market. We see that subsoil users and contractors have significant threats. One of them has threats to be pushed out of the market when, for example, the contract won't be completed, or some environmental or other risk will arise based on their activities. And these violations and this non-compliance will lead to the risk to the subsoil user, because if a subsoil user won't meet the license obligation, for example, the production volumes or significant certain amount of wells drilled in the fixed period of time, so they have a risk to be the license have a risk to be suspended or withdrawn. And for example, for sure, this is a risk for the government, because it will be more violations and it will be worse statistics, and they will need to develop new laws and to strengthen the control of the subsoil users and other players. So we see the high correlation between the threats for the of the contractors and subsoil users. But despite of this, we just need to mention that contractors have more opportunities and more freedom after that environmental changes that we have mentioned before regarding the 4th categories of objects. What does it mean? That responsibility of subsoil user, which was really significant before, growth, because the first category are the facilities of subsoil users. There are pipelines, there are well equipment, there are reservoirs, and any complex of the oil and gas production. And contractors are the facilities of contractors are 3rd, 4th, or even no category. That means that government and authorities won't focus on the contractors in the next time when this all of the objects of the Russian Federation will be categorized. And that means that the responsibility goes directly to subsoil users, and subsoil users have more risk. Then, if we compare, as we have done before, the main tasks of subsoil users and contractors, we need to understand that their position are unequal. For example, in addition to tasks that subsoil users will have after this categorization, development and additional documentation, the more state inspections, because we had before the 3 inspections, 1 inspection per 3 years, and now the subsoil users will have 1 inspections per 2 years. And it's only one of the example how the like environmental pressure on the subsoil users will arise. And also, in addition to that, subsoil users need to strengthen the control of the contractors. For sure, for now we can add something, some additional requirements for contractors in any contract, like HSE rules or something like that. But if they have now only financial responsibility before contractor, and then can argue any reasons why they have violated that or those points of the HSE rules. Before they had they had more obligations before the government. Now their obligations are going only to the to the subsoil user. For example, when we take like 1 year monitoring the contractor and what does it cost for the subsoil user. Here are the real-time based hours spent for monitoring the unecological contractor that has maybe has the environmental rules in the contract, but this is a risky contractor who violates the environmental law and doesn't meet the requirements. That means that 1 year of the contractor with the environmental audits, with the arguing some additional HSE rules for the working on the violations and everything like that, and according plus some payments and fines from the government during the state inspections, it is almost 1 million rubles for the subsoil user. And these costs could rise because this is data when the government has controlled and has strictly controlled on the contractors. Now the responsibility goes down, and the responsibility of the contractor goes down, and the responsibility of subsoil user arise, and these figures also will arise. So what does it mean? It means that contractors has now more opportunities to win tenders, to gain more clients when we are talking about subsoil users. So there are two types of contractors. One of them has a direct saving strategy. So we are a contractor, we, for example, drill wells, and we are not dealing with environmental issues. Environmental issues is the issue of subsoil user. We just have drilled wells, and this waste or this emissions or discharges, the design documentation, it's a full responsibility of the subsoil user. This is like direct saving strategy, minimum or no expenses on environmental protection, and that means that full responsibility is on subsoil user. The option for the contractors, and for example in my work we had some contractors, and it will be like earth and sky, how to work with these contractors and others, because they come to the subsoil user and then they say, we have daily environmental reporting, we have these HSE rules that we are developed for our company, and we are following these rules, we have trained personnel, and if something will happen, some violation will happen, we will cooperate and take maximum effort to minimize them. And this is not such big figures when what I have showed here, because here is unecological, unenvironmental oriented contractor, but the contractor with such kind of strategy is a good savings for subsoil user. So we are moving from the point of view of contractor to the point of view of subsoil user to show what is good and could be relevant for the contractor, and what are the benefits for the subsoil user. There are several steps of interaction between contractor and subsoil user. Very important are first and last step. First step when they are entering the tender and entering the area and starting the work. So they declare that they comply or not comply the HSC requirements, and are they important for them, and are they able and to fulfill them, and then they start to work and providing services, and when they close the contract, they get the feedback from the subsoil user, or a subsoil user can prolongate the contract or choose another contractor, and don't recommend, for example, and leave the negative feedback. So this is a great opportunity for contractors to minimize the risk of the subsoil user, and to use this ability to on the first and on the last stage of interaction with contractor. Then we will talk about how to implement this, how to move from the ecological, environmental-oriented contractor to the ecological-oriented contractor. So, or subsoil user. That's the rules are almost the same. Company without environmental management are similar to the end of the pipe approach. This approach means that the company has some kind of emissions, some kinds of wastewater discharge, some kind of waste. This certain volume, and the company pays for this volume, and it's good when the company pays for this volume. Some company don't pay, so then they have penalties and fines. This is the end of the pipe approach. So we don't care what is in the process, we just see at the end of the pipe and work with this data. Integrating the environmental management system is moving from the end of the pipe approach to the revision of the technological process. So we work not on the results, but we work on the process. What does it mean? This is the environmental management system is like a framework with tools, instruments, and other data that will help company to achieve environmental protection rules, achieve environmental protection goals in the most efficient and easy way. There are some basic steps of environmental management system implementation. So we perform such kind of reviewing the goals, analyzing any kind of impact. We establish the program of integrating of this system, and then when this system is starting to work, we are just constantly review this work of the system and fix the results. This is a very old scheme that shows the environmental management system principles, plan, do, check, act. So we just plan activities, then check, then implement them, then check how it works, and then react on this results of performed check. Key elements of environmental management systems are environmental policy. When we declare our main principles, we have some steps and important things for planning. For example, we need to make an inventory of environmental aspects, then set objectives and targets, and also we need to understand that employees understand environmental requirements and roles given them in this system. We set the targets and objectives that should be achieved on the certain stage of the activity of the company, and then we need to document all the procedures that we have in the environmental management process, make an operational control, establish good communication. So actually the environmental management system, it's just added the word environmental. It's a very good management system that arises in many companies and could be focused not only on environmental issues, because as you see that the very good practice to establish fixed responsibility, to check it and to develop procedures and to fulfill environmental control. But in this case, it is everything regarding the environmental impact of the company operating in the certain license area. One important thing of environmental management system is like as in HSE is trainings, education, and check of competence. There are also the one element of environmental management system is document control, because every process should be documented, where and how this document should be used into this process. Then the most important part of the environmental management is monitoring and checks and audits. So we can talk also about the corrective and preventive actions that should be based on the monitoring results. And also the main principle of environmental management system is sustainable development. We can see the many reports of the worldwide companies, mostly on the website, the sustainable development principles that could lead company to the not only to the business goals, also to the social goals, and to reach the mission and follow the mission of the company. If we talk about the oil and gas industry, there are several environmental risks are typical for each stage of the operating process. For example, there are some geological risk, environmental risk when we are making some geological surveys, or wells and drilling and fracking and operating. For example, when we are on the well drilling stage, we can say about the significant amount of waste. When we are talking about the fracking or coal tubing, then it means that we will increase the water use. And when we go to the operation stage, there is a high risk of oil spills and like soil and water contamination. This is a good example of audit risk formula that covers the environmental risks, because we see the persons, they are typical especially for oil and gas industry, because as you see the oil and gas business are a very risky area. It's technologically risky and environmental risky. So the percent of the inherent risk, so a typical risk of the industry is 40%. But the control risk is even higher and is a very important moment, because even if we have significant, huge risks of this industry, we can achieve worse audit results and worth common amount of risk when we have low quality of the environmental management. So that means that establishing the good management system, we can deal with typical oil and gas industry environmental risk. And the human factor is 3%. It's like a detection risk. The main failure that made the heads of many companies when they are evaluating the environmental risk, it's a finance-based approach. So they are just calculating how much will cost us to violate and pay some payments for now, and they compare how many actions and how much does it cost to prevent this risk, and they compare these figures, and yes, they know that, for example, when we violate once, we just will be inspected, and then we'll just gain some time, and because next inspection will follow us, will lead us to the improvements. But according to some financial strategies, many heads of non-environmental strategies and non-environmental approaches to the business strategy of company, they choose to save something right now and to violate and not to comply with the requirements. This is a non-green approach, and on this slide, it is shown that cost for environmental risk prevention is more than several costs for the violation. But this is a question what to include in this cost. The whole environmental management system preparation, or a design documentation development, or just any other management tools. So this is a question, what is cheaper in that case? And for example, for sure, the environmental strategy doesn't follows this approach. So we don't compare the cost of violation, but just we follow the requirements, and this is more honest and more positive for the company's reputation. The reasons to implement environmental management system goes not only from the obligations and the state authorities. We have some marketing reasons. That means that many companies follow green strategies to gain more clients and to get some additional profit from the government, maybe not for national profit, but any other preferences. So as I have mentioned before, the investors and stakeholders focus on the environmental management system, and it's like a green flag for them, and that means that they will have less risk. Less risk means less risk of financial losses, and more profitable company, and something like that. So the main aspect of EMS integration is that it should goes from up to down, but not only from one field environmental engineer, because it's very important that the head and CEO and direction understand why we're integrating environmental management system, and provide necessary assistance to hold this process. It is very interesting that there is in one curve, the DuPont curve, existing in the health and safety area, but it's very good in illustrating also the environmental questions, because, for example, the amount of the percentage of violations rate depends on the environmental cultural change. When, for example, employees have no environmental culture, so that could lead to many environmental violators. When someone stays near the field engineer and says you should perform and comply with environmental legislation, the rate of environmental violations are lower, but also not very efficient. And only integrating the environmental culture possible to do with using the environmental management system lead us to the minimum rate of the environmental violations. Sorry. So we have some costs and benefits of environmental management system. When we're talking about costs, it's just internal and external, like costs for works of specialists to integrate the system in the whole company management system. It's like a time for trainings, for some studies that should be done with each specialist of company, but there are many benefits. We have not only the environmental benefits, so like a prevention of pollutions or decrease of environmental payments. So as we said before, there are like some business benefits that are connected with the company reputation and credibility. When the company and subsoil user operates worldwide, the environmental management system helps to establish the management process in that area. Good example, the Lukoil Overseas company that operates, for example, in West Corner, operates this project, and in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and West Africa. And in many countries there are no environmental law and no environmental legislation because there are many geopolitical problems. But entering this area with the existing environmental management system makes the management process much more easy than that it could be without this system. So some kind of conclusions. Environmental protection is not only an obligation of subsoil user or any other contractor or any other company. It's not only could reduce the environmental violations amount, what will lead to the decrease of environmental payments. It is a strategy to build a good reputation for company, to decrease the financial risk, to decrease, to attract more more clients, more contractors, more investors, and more consumers. This now it is a very clear chain that is remarkable by many key players of our society and our business segment of oil and gas industry. And we have very good instruments to follow this environmental approach. This is environmental management system, the tools of environmental risk management, and this is remarkable that, and maybe you know, that many companies are using this approach in their business. For example, the very first step of the company they are not following now the environmental approach is making an annual environmental report. This is a very brief document that declares the principles, environmental principles of the company, even if on today's stage there are no environmental principles and no environmental policy. The company could develop them and declare and publish it on the website, and just to track, for example, to track the dynamics, for example, of emissions of the company, and understand for themselves why the emissions or waste volumes or some other indicators are growing, and to find the reasons and to make improvement improvement actions. It's very good to declare that the company understands, even, for example, the emissions goes down but goes up, but understand the reasons. Maybe it's because of the increase of production or other reasons that are not that are normal for the company. And to understand this process means that company follows environmental steps and rise the reputation and credibility of the company itself. The annual environmental reports could be used not only for the internal analysis, so it could be used on the websites. It could be very useful when, for example, company provides some data in data room and provides to the third parties information about their activities. So, answering today's question, what does it mean, the environmental protection and implementation of environmental management system? We can say that it is not a Sisyphean work, but new business opportunities. And you know that many companies are following these principles and get very positive results. Thank you very much for attention. I will be glad to answer your question if you have.
I would like to ask a question if anyone has.
Just a second, please. Microphone for you.
Could you please tell me your name and?
Oh yeah, sure. First of all, good afternoon, Nadezhda. My name is Nikita. And I want to say thanks for your presentation. It's quite informative. It was for me being not really exposed to environmental issues in petroleum. And as it was pointed on one of your slides that some of the employees, they don't know the importance of the environmental thing. So I'm not this kind of guy, you know. So yeah, and I want to say that your presentations follows a really good logic. So each time I had the question came to my mind, the answer was right on the next slide.
Thank you.
So here is the question. You stated initially in some of your first slides the fines like in Russia, which
According
the government
to
takes from the company, and you showed one number on the table. So, like, I had the question: how much does it cost? You had this table just now.
Oh, really? But it's not about fines.
No. It's like how much does it cost?
Yeah.
So, like, my question here. So you're giving here an exact number, and you are being as economist, right, in your undergrad. Don't you have any like uncertainty range for this number, or like what does this number depend on?
Okay, I just explained. I'm head of environmental department that manage this work, and we are working with different contractors. And I have some employees, and when I'm giving some tasks to several employees to make an additional inspection of contractors, to check, for example, the contract, to work on violations that were detected during the environmental audit. I know exact or approximately or exact how many hours does it take to work on this on each task. Or for example, me as head of department, I for example negotiate with state authorities regarding exact violation. Maybe you can see the salaries. Salaries are not maybe it's like average in Russia.
This is nothing like for a petroleum company.
But this points are existing. This is a middle when you check the headhunter. You can check different numbers. But maybe most important here, maybe not the amount of salary, but how many hours and are spent for each contractor per year. And the key specialists, for example, what should they do to prevent and minimize the effect of the negative effect of contractor that doesn't follow an environmental strategy?
Okay, I got your point, but like for this case, can you explain where this number comes from? Like, do you have, for example, if I'm having like really small, say, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, understand.
Oil field or like
yes,
offshore
yes,
something.
Yeah, I understand your question. I'm working in a company that is operating 2 license area. It's a very small oil and gas company with a very small amount of employees. So, and we are working with, for example, 10 contractors. They are simultaneously working on the oil field during the year. And some of them are following environmental strategy, some of them not. And these numbers are not from the local, or where are so many branches and so many contractors. But even when we'll take one special branch and one special like sector or licensed area and special contractor working on this licensed area, I think the numbers will be the same. So it's with one contractor. It's work with one contractor of the head of department and of the field ecologists. It could be 2, but it's amount of field ecologists. Not important here is just timing. How much time they spend on an environmental contractor to control it, to minimize the negative effect when it doesn't follow the strategy.
So that means that the company you're working at now should delegate their like this workflow to the consultants. Yeah.
No, it's not my it's not my point of view. My point of view is that working on a contractor, special contractor, and if the I'm okay with working with that, but when we are working with a contractor that doesn't follow environmental policy, we need to have such kind of big amount spent on one contractor. But in that time, we can make some improvements in our environmental business. So, I mean, for example, our department can make environmental reports and don't pay for this report and don't waste this money. But instead of having report, we need to work with contractor. This is. We spend the resources of time and money, and we have additional payments. So no, it's consulting. How can help us consulting? They can advise, choose another contractor that follows environmental strategies.
I think they're getting their like. So they're doing this workflow for you. For example, like I can explain from the point of geologists, like for example, then any like foreign company operating in Russia tries to go to the government and show them their reserves. They can't do it because like at I don't know this governmental office, but they're asking like your font size is 14, but it has to be like 16, and that's why they need to go to consultants who will do this work for them. But no, that's okay. I got your point. Thanks for this answer. I have one more question, if you don't mind. This is about end of the pipe approach. Is it more expensive than this number?
End of the pipe approach is like a general approach. When we have our own oil field, the company has, and it doesn't enter in the process. He just see, this facility is working, and we have such number of emissions, such number of waste generated, and such amount of wastewater. Then we collect these numbers, multiply of the rates, and pay amount. This end of the pipe approach. We don't see how this facility work, why why this facility works and emits more and more each year. So we just don't mind when we will move to the from the end of the pipe approach to the technological process and see what's the matter with the why we use this equipment. Is this according to the project? Is it required to do this? Or maybe we need to install the additional equipment and decrease the emissions amount. That is the work that could change this end of the pipe approach to the work with the process itself.
Okay, I got you. Thanks for
Thank
your
you
answer.
very much.
I probably missed this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Irina, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
My question is, how far is you now in an implementation of the EMS in your company, I mean, Ruspetro?
Good question. We need to understand the level of EMS. So, for example, there are some environmental management systems they are certified by Bureau Veritas and some kind of the agencies that gives us the documents you are working, and they're inspecting the company on the periodical basis once a year. And it is very important for the big companies that have huge activities. What about the general principles of the EMS, the documentation, the planning, the control that was mentioned here above? They are working now in our company. Because we are very small and we are operating, we have only 100 specialists for one oil field. So we have no financial reasons to be inspected from the Bureau Veritas or some kind of this organization. But the general principles, the policy, or for example, if something happens on environmental stage, we have some kind of risk, we follow the policy. We really have meetings and discuss how it will be solved in the most environmental friendly manner. Yeah, this.
And the second question then, how would you rate the maturity of the environmental culture in your company? So now it's more reactive or proactive?
When we talk about the operational office, so like management office, I don't see any problem. So it's just on very good levels. We need a little bit work maybe on the field specialist, because we have a huge amount of rotation, and and it requires a lot of work to train and retrain the specialists and check the environmental culture of them. But I will write on the very positive manner, and I'm happy with that, because I have seen other examples, because I have made many audits during my work in the big company. We have audit branches, and when, for example, companies don't have any instructions, and wow, it's just normal process. How could it be other? Yeah, so.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe, the last question, maybe you can name the company in Russia, oil and gas company, who is like an example for you in a level of the environmental maturity or environmental culture.
I will name it, but just I just need to say that this company moves from some mistakes. And because we can't judge the company if they have some not challenges. I think that Lukoil is very good on that. So as I have mentioned, that operating even worldwide when they haven't any environmental legislation, for example, that Iraq, there are several the wars and no absolutely no laws, and they are following the clean strategies. And for me, the Lukoil, because it's like a huge machine, and this is a very good example.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Sergey. I'm presenting the ROCS patent. Actually, first, thanks Josh for the great presentation. And the question will be, there's only one way methodology from result to regulation, or from regulation to result, as you described in your presentation. This you just monitor and then regulate, or regulate and then monitor. The monitoring the processes of this is not dependent on developing the well or drilling or just.
You mean that the environmental monitoring and regulation of the process of.
I'm talking about is this like one-way methodology? First, like we regulate and then monitor, or we monitor and then regulate. Which way is the better way for? Like, what's your position on these aspects?
I think that maybe I think it's like a mixture of the two ideas, because regulate, it's to get the law from the government and follow this law. And then we monitor. It's like take samples to check, to make an audit, to check how we operate in this under this law. We just need to take a law to set up the regulation, and then start operation activities, and then monitor how we follow these laws and how how efficient we are on this process. So first regulation and then monitoring.
But there will be another question. I'm sorry, this one is actually right.
Yeah, sure.
Well, but this why we just kind of use analytical proposal database. For example, we have like technologies, innovations, and a database proposals which they actually what we can modulate under critical analysis the aspects of the drawbacks of technologies. I'm talking about the risk, taking account the risk management and the drawbacks. For example, we have the database of technologies, and we actually know that some of them.
Best available technologies, you mean?
Well, choosing the best way. Well, I'm talking about the first. As far as I know, there's kind of another methodology. This from the regulation to monitoring. So when I first tried the law. Under the database analysis of the technologies which we have actually, and then we monitor it like this, like, or am I right or not? What's your position on this aspect?
So I'm just repeat if I have understand correctly. So we have the database of technologies, and then we take environmental law and put this law on this technological process, and then monitor.
Yeah, but only the technologies which are already tested, for example, for 1 year test, and they have good lab expectations from these technologies. And we know these good expectations, and this one we can actually know how better to regulate them. So I'm talking about to regulate the environment, vulnerable to risky damage on the just under to take into account the aspects of all the aspects of the critical analysis, and then after that, I have to say, the drawbacks, we can understand how we can manage then these risky management. So just.
When we say about the technologies and implementation them into the process, we need to remember that every technology first should have the expertise. So we just not implement the brand new technologies before any previous research and environmental expertise or state expertise on these technologies. Then implementing these technologies, we just compare what is the risk of implementing of these technologies. We just compare it with best practices, and we take the environmental law. And then when we operate, we start the monitoring process, if I understand correctly.
Oh, thank you. This was the question.
Good.
Other questions? Okay, I have. Nobody wants to join the discussion. My name is Olga. I think I work for one of the best companies in terms of environmental management, but I have nothing to do with it at the moment. It's selling petroleum development. I don't know if you know it. It's a tiny company, but compared to Lukoil, I would guess that the emissions and discharges, etc., are also relatively, I think, if you do the benchmarking, I think we are one of the best, although we are smaller than the Lukoil. In any case, my question would be in terms of the contractor selection process. I would guess, and it's a current challenge for us as well, as because I work for an HSE department, but not on the environmental part at the time. It's a challenging thing to actually influence, to influence the selection process when it comes to environmentally conscious or safety oriented contractor, because the cost, you mentioned that they train their personnel and they do all the things, all the right things, but it usually directly influences the cost of the services. So how does it work? I mean, when you have the selection process, do you include environmental criteria? Because if you just base your choice on the cost of services, then those environmentally friendly, etc., companies are going to lose the competition.
Okay, thank you for a question. Let's take one example. For example, we are signing the contract with the geological survey company, and this company has environmental engineer that is responsible for environmental activities of this contractor on our oil field. Except of this environmental engineer, there is environmental policy and the trained personnel that already exists in this company and doesn't cost us something additional. We just don't have some
about
payment.
You, it's about the contractor.
Yeah, but for example, we have the environmental engineer in the team that are moving to our oil field, and then we have plus to this team, we have, for example, the other field engineer, for example, geophysicist or something, that has environmental certifications and education, and this is the principle of the company itself. It's we are not charging in additional directly to having this specialist on our oil field. What could be the point of discussion is, for example, the waste amounts that they generate. This is a response of the subsoil users or of the contractors. Who pays for this, who removes it, or something like that. It could erase the some amount of the contract. We just need to compare the amount of the contract, this plus, and the risk of additional violations of how authorities are looking on our business, how often are the inspections, because I have mentioned before, the first categories will have one inspection in 2 years. So there's very often for the oil and gas business, because we are not expected that before, and other not regular federal ministries and federal authorities that will inspect us, and other risks that could erase working of this contractor of our area.
We all understand the risks. I mean, if you don't influence the tender decision, if you're not in it, if the criteria there are not HSE oriented, then you will have a very big chance to select the contractor which doesn't have all these policies and trained personnel, etc.
In what case? I just missed.
In most cases in Russia. Just because the companies that make the best proposal very often, because it's more attractive from a financial standpoint, then in most cases those are not the best in terms of HSE. This is my experience, at least.
Yeah, it could be so, and we have also this experience. But I say that the dynamics of the environmental legislation change will lead to more risk for yeah, and it will work in the future.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, also have a question. So what are the main challenges when implementing the environmental management system in a small company comparing with a big company?
Thank you. I think that is more easy. But the main challenges, I think, arise in the big company. Because in the small company, here's the director that could be like an initiator with help of environmental department. And it's you have mentioned that we have a point of communication. Communication in the small company is much more better than in bigger. It's one decision goes down for a very long time, and the implementation of the management system in the branches, it's more difficult and to check how this works in these branches. It's more difficult than in small company, and that's why I can say that worked in a big company and in small. Here I take responsibility on me and say that we have the environmental management system. Working in the environmental department in the big company, I was not sure that every branch has a brilliant environmental culture.
Thank you. So, any other questions? So, thank you. I would like to
Thank you very much.
express gratitude from Moscow, SPI Moscow section to Nadezhda for this informative and interesting presentation, and to all the participants for coming and for asking such nice and interesting questions. So, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
It was very nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can talk both in English or Russian, whatever you want. If you want me to speak in Russian, I will speak in Russian, in English. Окей, можно на русском, значит, я просто долго формулировать там. Я про flexibility хотел спросить. Если мы говорим про сервисные компании, про подрядчики, как можно, вот если сравнивать, почему про flexibility, сравнивая государственные требования, глав экологических экспертиз, этапов производства, там, использования продукции, там, в рамках использования при разработке месторождений, сравнивая международные стандарты ISO, там, провели бюро верить, аудит, проводим чисто аудит, там дают сертификацию. А вот именно если внедряется в CMS менеджмент, то есть, да, российский, как-то урегулировано у нас в государственном законе, есть ли какие-то там пункты, которые можно внедрить так, чтобы это удовлетворяло требованиям государства, да? С другой стороны, можно было бы там какой-то сертификат там eco-friendly там или ISO получить по EMS. Просто я почему спрашиваю, когда производство начинает в нефтяной, там, нефтегазовой компании, в российской, то есть реально там, у нас нет сейчас пока стандартов типа API, там, да, у нас просто этого нет, у нас компании нет российских. Но если об этом говорить, API, в принципе, у него по environmental там, protection, там, и environmental там, management высокие требования, на самом деле. И вот мы думаем сейчас, как именно это внедрить, а поэтому искал эти лекции, нашел вас.